She was sold with twin pups in her arms. The Lichen King growled, "I'll be husband and father both." The auction hall reeked of desperation and old wine. Torchlight flickered across faces twisted with greed, casting shadows that danced like demons on crumbling stone walls. In the center of it all, on a wooden platform worn smooth by the feet of the condemned, stood a woman who refused to bow. Callista Moonglow, an Omega, marked by fate, abandoned by her pack, clutching 2 bundles of silver fur against her chest. Twin pups, barely 3 months old, their tiny whimpers the only sound of innocence in a room drowning in cruelty. The auctioneer's voice cracked through the heavy air. 50 silver for the worthless Omega and her bastard children. 50 pieces of metal for 3 lives. No one bid. No one cared. Then the doors exploded open. The wind that rushed in carried the scent of pine forests and wild storms. Every head turned, every breath held, because the man who stood in that doorway was not just a man. He was legend. He was nightmare. He was the Lichen King, Magnus Dravenheart, black hair like raven wings, eyes burning gold in the darkness. And when his gaze locked on the woman holding those silver pups, something ancient and inevitable clicked into place. Destiny, fury, and a growl that would change everything. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from and how old you are. I hope you enjoy the story. The auction hall reeked of desperation and old wine. Callista Moonglow stood on the wooden platform, her arms wrapped protectively around 2 bundles that whimpered softly against her chest. Twin pups, barely 3 months old, with silver fur that caught the flickering torchlight like captured moonbeams. Her own blonde hair hung in tangled waves around her pale face, and her bare feet were cold against the rough planks beneath them. She was an Omega, marked by fate, abandoned by her pack, and now reduced to this, a commodity, a thing to be sold to the highest bidder in a hall filled with leering eyes and cruel laughter. The auctioneer, a weasel of a man with yellowed teeth, grabbed her arm roughly. The pups whimpered louder, and Callista pressed them closer, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. "Quiet, you worthless thing," the auctioneer hissed, his breath hot and rancid. "Smile for the buyers. Show them you're worth something." But Callista couldn't smile. She couldn't do anything but hold her children and pray to the moon goddess that whoever bought them would show mercy. The pups were innocent. They deserved better than this. Better than her. Better than a mother who couldn't even protect them from being sold like livestock. The crowd murmured, their voices a low rumble of disinterest. An Omega, with 2 bastard pups, was hardly a prize. She was damaged goods, used and discarded. No one would want the burden of feeding 3 mouths when one was already too many. "Starting bid at 50 silver, the auctioneer called out, his voice cracking with false enthusiasm. Silence, heavy and suffocating. Callista closed her eyes, feeling tears slip down her cheeks. This was it. This was how their story ended. Sold for scraps or left to rot in the streets. Either way, there was no hope left. Then the doors at the back of the hall exploded open with a force that made the entire building shudder. The torches flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows across the walls, and a gust of night air swept through the room, carrying with it the scent of pine forests and wild storms. Every head turned. Every breath held. A man stood in the doorway, and he was nothing short of magnificent. Tall, impossibly tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the moonlight streaming in behind him. His hair was black as a raven's wing, falling past his shoulders in thick waves that seemed to absorb the darkness around him. His face was carved from stone and shadow, all sharp angles and fierce beauty, with eyes that gleamed like molten gold in the dim light. Magnus Dravenheart, the Lichen King. Callista felt her knees go weak. She had heard stories of him. Whispers passed between pack members in hushed, frightened tones. He was ruthless, they said. A warrior who had conquered every territory that dared oppose him. A beast who showed no mercy to his enemies and no softness to anyone. He ruled the northern kingdoms with an iron fist, and his very name was enough to make grown wolves tremble. and he was walking toward the platform with purpose in every step, his boots echoing like thunder against the stone floor. The crowd parted for him like water before a ship's prow. No one dared meet his eyes. No one dared even breathe too loudly. The auctioneer's face went white as fresh snow, and he stumbled backward, nearly falling off the platform in his haste to get away. Magnus didn't acknowledge any of them. His golden eyes were locked on Callista, burning with an intensity that made her feel like she was being stripped bare. Every secret and scar laid open for him to see. She wanted to look away, to hide, but she couldn't. She was frozen, trapped in his gaze like a rabbit before a wolf. He stopped at the edge of the platform, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the wild, untamed scent of him. Power rolled off him in waves, primal and dangerous, making every instinct in her body scream at her to submit, to bow, to acknowledge him as the apex predator he was. But Callista didn't bow. She couldn't. Not when she was holding her children. Not when they were all she had left in this world. Magnus tilted his head slightly, studying her with those impossible eyes. Then his gaze dropped to the twin pups in her arms, and something flickered across his face. Something too quick to read, but profound enough to change the very air around them. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, like distant thunder rolling across mountains. "How much?" the auctioneer stammered, his words tripping over themselves in his panic. "Your Majesty, the starting bid was 50 silver. But for you, of course, we could—" "I wasn't asking you." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The auctioneer went silent, his mouth hanging open like a fish gasping for air. Magnus looked back at Callista, and this time his voice was softer, though no less commanding. "How much do they want for you and your pups?" Callista found her voice, though it came out barely above a whisper. I don't know. I don't have any say in it." Something dark and furious flashed in Magnus's eyes. He turned his head slowly toward the auctioneer, and the man actually whimpered. "Name your price. Now." 500 silver. No, 300, 200. Whatever your Majesty thinks is fair." Magnus reached into his coat and pulled out a heavy leather purse. He tossed it at the auctioneer's feet, and it landed with a solid thunk, coins spilling out across the platform. More gold than Callista had ever seen in her life. Enough to buy a small estate, not a broken Omega and her bastard children. "That should cover it," Magnus said coldly. "And if I ever hear that you've trafficked in Omegas again, I'll come back and burn this place to the ground with you inside it. Are we clear?" The auctioneer nodded so frantically his head looked like it might fall off. Yes, your Majesty. Perfectly clear. Crystal clear." Magnus turned back to Callista and extended his hand. It was large and scarred, marked by years of battle and bloodshed. But when he spoke, his voice had lost its sharp edge, becoming something gentler, almost reverent. "Come with me. You're safe now." Callista stared at his hand, her mind racing. This had to be a trap. Men like him didn't save women like her out of kindness. There was always a price, always a catch. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something unexpected. Not cruelty or calculation, but something that looked almost like concern, protection, a promise. The pup shifted in her arms, mewling softly, and she realized she didn't have a choice. Whatever awaited her with this stranger couldn't be worse than what she'd already endured. At least with him, her children might have a chance. She reached out and placed her trembling hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid, and for the first time in months, Callista felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Magnus helped her down from the platform, his movements careful and deliberate, as if he were handling something precious and fragile. He shrugged off his long black coat and draped it around her shoulders, the fabric heavy and warm and carrying his scent. Then he looked down at the twin pups, and his expression softened in a way that seemed impossible for a man with his reputation. "What are their names?" he asked quietly. Callista swallowed hard. I haven't named them yet. I was afraid to. I thought if I named them, it would hurt more when they were taken from me." Magnus's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking beneath his skin. No one will take them from you. Not now. Not ever. I give you my word." And somehow, impossibly, she believed him. He led her out of that terrible place, through the gawking crowd and into the cold night air. A massive black carriage waited outside, pulled by 4 horses that looked more like shadows than living creatures. Magnus opened the door and helped her inside, his hand steady at her back, before climbing in after her. The interior was luxurious, all dark velvet and polished wood, with cushioned seats soft enough to sink into. Callista had never been in anything so fine. She clutched the pups closer, suddenly aware of how filthy and ragged she must look in such surroundings. Magnus sat across from her, his long legs stretched out, his golden eyes never leaving her face. The carriage lurched into motion, and they began the journey into the unknown. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the rhythmic clatter of hooves on cobblestones and the soft breathing of the sleeping pups. Finally, Magnus broke the silence. "What's your name?" "Callista," she whispered. "Callista Moonglow." He nodded slowly, as if committing it to memory. "I'm Magnus. But you already know that." "Yes. Everyone knows who you are. And yet you're not afraid of me." It wasn't a question, but an observation, and there was something almost curious in his tone. Callista looked down at her children, their tiny faces peaceful in sleep. "I've learned that there are worse things to fear than powerful men. At least you were honest about buying me. The others just took what they wanted and left me to die afterward." The temperature in the carriage plummeted. When Callista looked up, she saw that Magnus's face had gone cold and terrible, his eyes blazing with a fury so intense it was almost physical. "Who?" She shook her head quickly. "It doesn't matter now. They're gone. My pack cast me out when they found out I was pregnant. Said I was an embarrassment, a stain on their honor. So they left me in the woods to die. But I survived. I always survive." There was a long, tense silence. Then Magnus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "Listen to me, Callista. I didn't buy you to use you or hurt you. I bought you because no one deserves to be sold like an animal, especially not with children in their arms. You're under my protection now. That means you and your pups will want for nothing. You'll have food, shelter, safety, and no one, not in my kingdom or anywhere else, will dare to touch you. Do you understand?" Callista felt fresh tears spring to her eyes, but this time they weren't from despair. "Why? Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Magnus held her gaze, and for just a moment, she saw past the fearsome reputation and the cold exterior to something deeper. Something lonely and achingly human. "Because I know what it's like to be alone, to feel like the whole world has abandoned you. And because when I walked into that hall and saw you standing there, holding those pups like they were the only thing keeping you tethered to this world, something inside me recognized something inside you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Callista didn't know what to say. She didn't know what any of this meant or where it would lead. But as the carriage rolled through the night, taking her away from her old life and toward something new and uncertain, she felt a tiny seed of something plant itself in her chest. Not just hope, but possibility. The journey to Magnus's castle took 3 days. 3 days of rolling through changing landscapes, from the grimy streets of the trading city to open farmland, to dense forests that seemed to whisper secrets in the wind. Callista watched it all from the carriage window, the pups nestled in her lap, while Magnus sat across from her in companionable silence. He was not what she expected. At stops, he personally ensured she had fresh food and clean water. He never touched her without permission, never looked at her with the hungry, possessive eyes she'd grown accustomed to from other men. Instead, he treated her with a courtesy and respect that felt foreign, almost surreal. At night, they stayed in inns along the road, and Magnus always secured separate rooms for them, posting guards at her door to ensure her safety. The first night, Callista had lain awake in a real bed for the first time in months, holding her sleeping pups and wondering if this was all some elaborate dream that would shatter come morning. But morning came, and Magnus was still there, patient and steady as a mountain. On the second day, one of the pups began crying inconsolably, his tiny face scrunched up in distress. Callista tried everything, rocking him, singing softly, but nothing worked. She felt panic rising in her chest, the familiar terror that she was failing as a mother, that she couldn't even soothe her own child. Then Magnus did something unexpected. He reached across the carriage and held out his hands. "May I?" Callista hesitated, every protective instinct screaming at her not to let this powerful, dangerous man touch her baby. But the pup was suffering, and she was out of options. Slowly, carefully, she placed the crying infant in Magnus's large hands. The Lichen King cradled the tiny pup against his chest with surprising gentleness, his massive hand spanning the baby's entire back. He began to hum, a low, rumbling sound that resonated deep in his chest. It was wordless and ancient, a melody that seemed to come from the earth itself. The pup's cries quieted almost immediately. His tiny body relaxed, and within moments, he was asleep, his small hand clutching at Magnus's shirt. Callista stared in shock. "How did you—" Magnus smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Where before he had been all sharp edges and fierce intensity, now he looked almost boyish, the corners of his eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. "My mother used to sing that to me when I was young. Before she passed, I never thought I'd use it again." Something in Callista's chest cracked open. This man, this fearsome king who commanded armies and struck terror into the hearts of his enemies, was sitting here humming lullabies to her child. The contradiction was staggering, beautiful, heartbreaking. "Thank you," she whispered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Magnus looked up at her, still holding the sleeping pup, and their eyes met. In that moment, something passed between them. A recognition, a connection, the beginning of something neither of them had words for yet. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "This is what family does." And even though Callista barely knew this man, even though everything was uncertain and strange, those words settled into her bones like truth. When they finally arrived at Magnus's castle on the third day, Callista was struck speechless. It rose from the mountainside like something out of a legend, all soaring towers and ancient stone, surrounded by forests that stretched as far as the eye could see. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, and for a moment, Callista felt like she'd stepped into a fairy tale. The carriage pulled through massive iron gates, and servants rushed out to meet them. But Magnus waved them back, instead helping Callista down himself, his hand firm and steady at her elbow. The pups were awake now, their silver eyes wide as they took in their new surroundings. An older woman with kind eyes and silver hair approached, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Your Majesty, welcome home." "Thank you, Meredith." Magnus gestured to Callista. "This is Callista Moonglow and her children. They'll be staying with us. Please prepare the East Wing chambers, the ones with the nursery adjacent. Make sure they have everything they need, clothing, supplies, whatever is required for the little ones." Meredith's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly, her smile never wavering. "Of course, Your Majesty. Right away." She approached Callista with open hands. "My dear, you look exhausted. Let's get you and these precious babes settled, shall we? A hot bath, a proper meal, and a soft bed will do you a world of good." Callista found herself being gently shepherded into the castle, through corridors lined with tapestries and lit by chandeliers that sparkled like captured stars. Everything was overwhelming, too beautiful, too much. She felt like she was going to wake up any moment back in the filth and cold of the streets. But then she felt Magnus's presence behind her, solid and reassuring, and somehow that anchored her, made it real. The chambers Meredith led them to were more luxurious than anything Callista had ever imagined. The main room had a fireplace already crackling with warmth, plush rugs covering polished floors, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a palace. Through an open door she could see the nursery, complete with 2 small cradles carved from dark wood and draped with soft blankets. "Oh," Callista breathed, tears springing to her eyes again. This is too much." "Nonsense," Meredith said briskly, though her voice was gentle. Every mother and child deserves comfort and safety. Now let's get you cleaned up, and then we'll see about feeding everyone, shall we?" Over the next hour, Callista was bathed, dressed in a soft gown of pale blue silk, and fed a meal that made her want to weep with gratitude. The pups were bathed as well, cooing and splashing in warm water, their silver fur fluffing out like dandelion seeds. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Callista felt clean, fed, safe. When Meredith finally left her alone, promising to return with supplies for the babies, Callista stood at the window of her new chambers and looked out over the forest below. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of rose and violet, and she felt a strange tightness in her chest. A soft knock at the door made her turn. "Come in." Magnus entered, and he'd changed as well, though he still wore black. His hair was loose around his shoulders, and in the warm glow of the firelight, he looked less like a fearsome king and more like a man. Just a man. "I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed," he said, his voice quieter in this intimate space. "More than everything," Callista replied honestly. "I still don't understand why you're doing all this." Magnus walked closer, stopping a respectful distance away. He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see the conflict in his eyes, the war between what he wanted to say and what he thought he should say. Finally, he spoke. "When I was young, my mother was an Omega. My father was an Alpha, a king, and their mating was controversial. The court hated her, called her weak, unsuitable, a stain on the royal bloodline. They made her life miserable. And when she died giving birth to my sister, they celebrated. Celebrated that the weak link was gone." His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and Callista could see the old pain in his eyes, still raw, even after all these years. "I was only 10 years old," he continued, his voice rough, "but I swore that day that I would never let anyone treat an Omega that way again. That if I ever had the power to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, I would use it. So when I heard there was an auction in that city, trafficking Omegas," his jaw clenched, "I had to go. I had to stop it. And when I saw you," he trailed off, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "When I saw you holding your pups, so fierce and brave even though you were terrified, I knew I couldn't leave you there. I wouldn't." Callista felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Your mother would be proud of the man you became." Magnus smiled sadly. "I hope so. Though I think she'd have some choice words about my reputation. I'm not known for my gentleness. Maybe not to the world," Callista said softly. "But you've been nothing but gentle with us." Something shifted in Magnus's expression, a vulnerability breaking through his carefully constructed armor. "That's because you're not the world. You're—" He stopped, shook his head. "I should let you rest. Tomorrow we can discuss arrangements, what you need for the pups, anything you want to learn about the castle and the grounds. You're free to go anywhere, do anything. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be." He turned to leave, but Callista found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "Magnus?" He paused, looking back at her. "Thank you. For everything. For saving us. For giving us a chance at a real life." She hesitated, then added quietly, "And for understanding that we needed more than just shelter. We needed kindness." Magnus's eyes softened, and for a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something more. But instead, he just nodded. "Sleep well, Callista. And if you or the pups need anything during the night, my chambers are just down the hall. Don't hesitate to wake me." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Callista alone with her thoughts and her sleeping children, and a heart that felt fuller than it had in years. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Callista slowly began to settle into life at the castle, though she kept expecting it all to end, for the dream to shatter and reality to come crashing back in. But it didn't. Every morning, she woke up in her comfortable bed, fed her pups in the nursery, and explored a little more of her new home. The castle staff treated her with respect and warmth, never once making her feel like the charity case she knew she was. Meredith became a constant companion, helping with the babies and teaching Callista about the castle's routines and traditions. The pups were thriving, growing stronger and more playful by the day, their silver fur gleaming and their eyes bright with health. And Magnus. Magnus was a constant presence, though he never imposed. He checked on them daily, bringing gifts for the pups, soft toys, colorful rattles, tiny clothes embroidered with wolves and moons. He asked Callista about her day, listened when she spoke, and slowly, carefully, began to draw her out of her shell. On the 10th day, Magnus knocked on her door at sunset, his expression almost nervous. It was such an unusual look on the fierce Lycan king that Callista found herself smiling despite her curiosity. "Would you join me for dinner tonight?" he asked, his deep voice softer than usual. "Just the two of us. Meredith has offered to watch Arlo and Lyra." Callista's heart fluttered. A private dinner felt intimate, significant. But when she looked into his golden eyes, she saw nothing but genuine hope and a vulnerability that made her chest ache. "I'd like that." The dining room Magnus led her to was smaller than the grand hall she'd glimpsed during her explorations. This one was clearly meant for intimate gatherings, with a table set for two before a roaring fireplace. Candles cast dancing shadows across the walls, and the scent of roasted herbs and fresh bread filled the air. Magnus pulled out her chair, a gesture so gentlemanly it made her blush. When he sat across from her, she noticed he'd changed into a deep blue tunic that made his eyes seem even more golden in the firelight. His long black hair was pulled back loosely, and she found herself wondering what it would feel like to run her fingers through it. The thought made her cheeks burn hotter, and she quickly looked down at her plate. "You look beautiful tonight," Magnus said quietly, and when she glanced up, the sincerity in his gaze stole her breath. "Though you look beautiful every day. I wanted you to know that I see you, Callista, not just as someone I'm protecting, but as a woman, a remarkable woman." Callista's throat tightened with emotion. No one had looked at her that way in so long. No one had made her feel seen, valued, desired in a way that felt respectful, rather than predatory. "Thank you," she whispered. "And thank you for this, for taking the time to court me, I suppose. You didn't have to." Magnus reached across the table, his hand palm up in invitation. After a moment's hesitation, Callista placed her hand in his fingers curled around hers, warm and strong. I want to know everything about you, your favorite color, what makes you laugh, what you dream about when you let yourself dream. I want to earn your trust, your affection. Not because I bought you, but because you choose to give them to me." They talked through dinner, the conversation flowing easily. Callista found herself laughing at Magnus's dry humor, surprised by how witty he could be when he wasn't being the intimidating king. He told her stories of his childhood, of pranks he'd played on his tutors and adventures in the forest surrounding the castle. She shared her own memories, carefully at first, then more freely as his gentle attention encouraged her. When she mentioned her love of stars and constellations, Magnus's eyes lit up. "Come with me. I want to show you something." He led her through the castle and up a winding staircase she hadn't explored yet. They emerged onto a tower balcony, and Callista gasped. The night sky stretched above them, vast and glittering with countless stars. The moon hung full and luminous, painting everything in silver light. "This is where I come when I need to think," Magnus said softly, standing beside her at the railing. "When the weight of the crown gets too heavy, there's something about the stars that reminds me I'm just a small part of something much larger." Callista looked up at the constellations, finding familiar patterns. "My mother used to tell me the stars were the moon goddess's children, watching over us. That we're never truly alone because they're always there, bearing witness to our joys and sorrows. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was." Callista's voice caught. "She died when I was 12. Illness. After that, my father, he never recovered. He became distant. And when he passed 3 years later, I was truly alone in my pack." Magnus moved closer, his presence warm and solid beside her. "I'm sorry. Losing a parent is—" He paused, swallowing hard. "When my mother died, I thought the world had ended. She was the only one who truly understood me. The only one who saw past what everyone wanted me to be to who I actually was. Without thinking, Callista reached out and took his hand. She'd be so proud of you, Magnus. You've built something good here. You're not just a warrior king. You're a man of honor. Magnus turned to face her fully, and the moonlight caught in his golden eyes, making them glow. You make me want to be better than I am. When I'm with you, I feel like maybe I don't have to be the monster everyone expects. Maybe I can just be myself. The vulnerability in his voice broke something open in Callista's chest. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them until she could feel his warmth, smell the pine and smoke scent of him. You're not a monster, Magnus. You never were. You're just a man who's had to be strong for too long without anyone to be strong for him. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch achingly gentle. Can I kiss you, Callista? I've been wanting to since the moment you placed your hand in mine in that carriage. But I needed you to know it's more than attraction. It's everything you are. Instead of answering, Callista rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. Then Magnus's arms came around her, pulling her close, and the kiss deepened into something that made her dizzy with want and need and the overwhelming feeling of finally being cherished. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, Magnus rested his forehead against hers. I'm falling for you, Moonlight. Falling so fast it terrifies me. Then fall, Callista whispered. I'll catch you, just like you caught me. She learned that he rose before dawn to train with his soldiers, that he spent hours in his study managing the complexities of his kingdom, that he had a fierce intelligence hidden behind his warrior's exterior. She learned that he preferred his tea black, that he had a scar across his ribs from a battle when he was 16, and that despite his fearsome reputation, his people loved him because he was fair and just. In the weeks that followed their first kiss, Magnus began teaching Callista to ride. He'd noticed her watching the horses in the stables with longing, and one morning he appeared at her door with riding clothes and a mischievous smile that transformed his usually serious face. I can't possibly, Callista protested, even as excitement bubbled in her chest. I've never been on a horse in my life. Then it's time you learned, Magnus said, offering his arm. Don't worry. I'll be with you every step of the way. The horse he'd chosen for her was a gentle mare named Moon Whisper, with a silvery coat that reminded Callista of her pup's fur. Magnus lifted her into the saddle with ease, his hands steady at her waist, before mounting his own massive black stallion. The first few rides were clumsy and nerve-wracking, but Magnus was endlessly patient. He rode beside her, his voice calm and encouraging, catching her when she started to slip, praising every small success. And when she finally managed to trot without his assistance, the pride in his eyes made her feel like she'd conquered the world. They began riding together every morning after he finished training. He'd take her through the forests, showing her hidden waterfalls and meadows filled with wildflowers. They'd stop to rest by streams, talking about everything and nothing, and sometimes they'd just sit in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, watching the sunlight filter through the leaves. One afternoon, they were returning from a longer ride when a sudden summer storm rolled in. Rain poured from the sky in sheets, soaking them within seconds. Magnus led them to a small hunting cabin on the edge of his property, and they stumbled inside, laughing and dripping water everywhere. So much for checking the weather, Magnus said, running his hands through his soaked hair. The gesture made his black locks fall loose around his shoulders, and Callista found herself staring. He looked wild like this, less like a king, and more like the ancient wolves their kind descended from. I don't mind, she said honestly. This is the most fun I've had in... I can't even remember how long. Magnus crossed the small space between them, water still dripping from his clothes. His eyes had darkened to a deeper gold, intense in a way that made Callista's breath catch. You're shivering. She hadn't noticed, but now that he mentioned it, she could feel the cold seeping into her bones. Magnus immediately moved to the fireplace, building a fire with practiced efficiency. Soon, warm light and heat filled the cabin, driving away the chill. He found blankets in a chest and brought them to her, wrapping one around her shoulders. His hands lingered, rubbing her arms gently to warm her. The gesture was innocent, caring, but Callista felt heat of a different kind spread through her body. "Magnus," she whispered, looking up at him. His eyes met hers, and something electric passed between them. "Tell me to stop," he said roughly. "Tell me to step away and I will. But if you don't, I'm going to kiss you like I've been dreaming of doing every night." "Don't stop," Callista breathed. "Don't step away." This kiss was different from their first. Where that had been sweet and tentative, this was passionate and desperate. Magnus's hands tangled in her wet hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss, and Callista pressed herself against him, needing to be closer. His mouth moved to her jaw, her neck, finding the sensitive spot behind her ear that made her gasp. "You're so beautiful," he murmured against her skin. "So strong. Do you have any idea what you do to me?" Callista pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. What she saw there made her tremble. Not fear, but desire. Raw and honest and directed entirely at her. "Show me," she whispered. "Show me what I do to you." Magnus groaned, a sound that came from deep in his chest, and kissed her again. They sank down onto the rug before the fire, wrapped in each other in the blankets, the storm raging outside while they created their own heat within. Magnus worshipped her with touches and kisses, mapping every inch of her like she was precious treasure. And when she gasped his name, he swore he'd never heard anything more beautiful. Afterward, they lay tangled together, the fire crackling beside them, rain drumming on the roof. Magnus held her close, one hand stroking through her hair, the other resting possessively on her hip. "I love you," he said quietly, seriously. "I need you to know that this wasn't just, I love you, Callista." Completely. Callista turned in his arms to face him, pressing a soft kiss to his lips. "I love you too. I think I have for a while now. I was just too afraid to admit it. And now? Now I'm still afraid," she admitted. "But I'm more afraid of losing this. Losing you. So I'm choosing to be brave." Magnus's smile was radiant, transforming his entire face into something beautiful and boyish. "That's my moonlight. Brave even when you're terrified." They eventually returned to the castle as the storm cleared, both of them flushed and happy, and unable to stop touching each other. Meredith took one look at them and smiled knowingly, but said nothing except that the babies had been perfect angels. And he learned about her childhood in a small pack where she'd never quite fit in because she was an Omega, about her love of books and stories, about how she'd once dreamed of being a healer, about the father of her pups, an alpha who had promised her everything and given her nothing but pain and abandonment. The night she told him about that alpha, they were in the library, the pups asleep in their nursery. Callista had been withdrawn all day, and Magnus had gently pressed until she finally let the story spill out. How she'd believed the alpha's promises of love and forever, how he'd disappeared the moment she told him she was pregnant, how her pack had blamed her, called her a whore and a disgrace, and cast her out to die in the winter cold. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down her face, and Magnus was trembling with barely contained rage, but he didn't explode. Instead, he pulled her into his lap, cradling her like something infinitely precious, and let her cry against his chest until she had no tears left. "I wish I could kill him for you," Magnus said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I wish I could hunt down every single person who hurt you and make them pay for what they took from you." Callista looked up at him, seeing the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, the barely leashed violence simmering beneath his control. But it didn't frighten her. It made her feel safe, because that violence was never directed at her, only at those who would harm her. "I don't need you to kill anyone. I just need you to keep doing what you're doing. Loving me. Loving my children. Making us feel like we matter." Magnus's expression softened, and he kissed her forehead. "You more than matter. You're everything. And those children, Arlo and Lyra, they're mine now. In my heart, they're my son and daughter. Nothing will ever change that. They're lucky to have you as a father. Callista whispered. I'm lucky to have them. To have you. You've given me something I thought I'd never have. A family. A reason to be gentle. After particularly difficult days managing his kingdom, Magnus would come to Callista's chambers exhausted and worn. She learned to read his moods, to know when he needed to talk, and when he just needed her presence. She'd sit with him, sometimes reading aloud while he rested his head in her lap, her fingers running through his long black hair in soothing strokes. Other times, she'd simply hold him, letting him find peace in her arms. You're my sanctuary, he told her one night, his voice heavy with sleep. The only place I can stop being the Lycan King and just be Magnus. Callista pressed a kiss to his temple. Then rest, my love. I'll keep watch. And she did, holding him through the night, marveling at how this fierce, powerful man trusted her enough to be vulnerable in her arms. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Callista was sitting in the library, one of the pups asleep in her arms, while the other played on a blanket at her feet. She'd discovered the library in her second week, and it had quickly become her sanctuary. Walls upon walls of books, comfortable chairs by the fire, windows that looked out over the mountains. It was heaven. Magnus found her there, as he often did. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her read, and Callista felt her heart do something strange in her chest. He looked softer in these moments, when he thought no one was watching. Less like a king and more like a man who carried too many burdens alone. May I join you? He asked, his deep voice pulling her from her thoughts. Of course. He settled into the chair across from her, his long legs stretched out toward the fire. For a while they sat in comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackling of flames and the soft cooing of the pup on the blanket. Then Magnus spoke, his voice low and contemplative. I've been thinking about the pups. They'll need names soon. They're growing so fast, and they should know what they're called. Callista looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms, then at the one playing at her feet. I know. I've been thinking about it too, but I've been afraid. I'm afraid of what? Afraid that if I name them, I'll love them even more than I already do. And if something happens, if I lose them somehow. She couldn't finish the sentence. Magnus leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his golden eyes intense. Nothing is going to happen to them, Callista. I swear to you on my life, on my crown, on everything I hold sacred. They are under my protection. Anyone who tried to harm them would have to go through me first, and I promise you, no one is strong enough to do that. The ferocity in his voice, the absolute conviction, made something warm bloom in Callista's chest. She believed him. Completely. All right, she said softly. Then let's name them. They spent the next hour discussing names, tossing ideas back and forth while the pups played and slept, and filled the library with their innocent presence. Finally, they decided. The boy, the one who cried easily but smiled just as easily, would be named Arlo, which meant fortified hill, a name for a protector. The girl, fierce even in her tiny body, with eyes that already held a warrior's spirit, would be named Lyra, after the constellation of the harp. When they spoke the names aloud, testing them out, Callista felt something shift. They were real now. Her children had identities, futures. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were Arlo and Lyra, and they deserved every good thing this world had to offer. Magnus reached over and gently touched Arlo's tiny hand, and the baby immediately gripped his finger with surprising strength. The Lycan King's face softened in a way that made Callista's breath catch. "Hello, little warrior," he murmured. "Welcome to the world, Arlo." Then he looked up at Callista, and the tenderness in his eyes nearly undid her. "They're lucky to have you as their mother." "I'm lucky to have you as their... She trailed off, unsure what to call him. Protector? Guardian? Friend? Magnus seemed to understand her struggle. He stood and crossed the space between them, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. His hand came up to cup her cheek, and the touch was so gentle, so reverent, that Callista felt tears spring to her eyes. "I meant what I said that first night in the carriage," he said quietly. I will be husband and father both if you'll let me. Not because I bought you, not because I feel obligated, but because when I look at you, when I see you with Arlo and Lyra, I see everything I never knew I wanted. A family, a home, someone to protect and cherish not out of duty, but out of... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the word. Callista reached up and covered his hand with hers, holding it against her cheek. Out of what, Magnus? His eyes searched hers, vulnerable and open in a way she'd never seen from him before. Out of love. I'm falling in love with you, Callista Moonglow. I have been since the moment I saw you refuse to bow even when you were terrified. And I'm falling in love with your children like they're my own. I know it's too soon. I know you have no reason to trust me with your heart when so many have broken it before. But I had to tell you. I had to let you know that this, all of this, isn't charity. It's me trying to build something real with you, if you'll have me. Callista's heart was hammering so hard, she thought it might break through her ribs. This man, this powerful, fierce, lonely man, was kneeling before her, offering her everything. His heart, his protection, his life. And the terrifying, wonderful thing was that she wanted to take it. She wanted to take all of it and give him everything in return. I'm scared, she whispered honestly. I'm scared of trusting again, of letting someone in and having them destroy me. I know. Magnus's thumb stroked her cheek, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. And I'm not asking you to give me everything right now. I'm just asking for a chance. Let me prove to you that I'm different, that I will never hurt you or Arlo or Lyra, that I will spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you know you're cherished and safe and loved. Callista looked into his golden eyes and saw nothing but sincerity, nothing but truth, and she realized that somewhere along the way, in the quiet moments and gentle gestures, she'd started falling too, falling for this man who was fierce to the world but soft with her, who held her children like they were made of glass and spoke to her like she was precious. Okay, she breathed. Okay, Magnus. I'll give you that chance. I'll give us that chance. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He leaned forward, and Callista met him halfway, their lips meeting in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. It tasted like hope and new beginnings, and all the dreams she'd thought were dead coming back to life. When they pulled apart, Magnus rested his forehead against hers. I won't let you down, Moonlight. I swear it. And Callista believed him. The months that followed were the happiest of Callista's life. She and Magnus grew closer every day, building a relationship founded on trust and respect and genuine affection. He courted her properly, despite them living under the same roof, taking her on walks through the forest, reading to her in the library, teaching her to ride the massive horses in his stables. He was patient with her fears, understanding when she pulled away, and constant in his affection without being overbearing. And with Arlo and Lyra, he was nothing short of wonderful. He played with them, sang to them, paced the halls with them when they couldn't sleep. He commissioned the finest craftsmen to make them toys and furniture, but he also carved them little wooden wolves with his own hands. He was there for their first laughs, their first attempts at crawling, every milestone celebrated like a victory. The castle staff watched their little family with warm eyes, whispering about how the fierce Lichen King had finally found softness, how the sad Omega had blossomed under his care. Meredith told Callista one day that she'd never seen Magnus so happy, that he smiled more in these few months than in the previous decade. But of course, happiness is never without its challenges. The first test came in the form of Magnus's council. The advisors and nobles who helped him run the kingdom had been growing increasingly agitated about his attachment to Callista and the Pups. They wanted him to make a political alliance through marriage, to secure the kingdom's future with heirs from a strong bloodline. The fact that he was wasting his time on an Omega and her bastard children was, in their eyes, beneath him. They demanded a formal meeting, and Magnus, bound by duty, had to attend. He asked Callista to come with him, to stand by his side, but she could see the worry in his eyes. He was afraid of how they would treat her, what they would say. The council chamber was an imposing room, all dark wood and heavy stone, with a massive table at its center. The nobles sat around it like vultures, their eyes cold and calculating as they watched Callista enter with Magnus. She held her head high, refusing to show weakness even though her heart was racing. Magnus took his seat at the head of the table and pulled Callista's chair close to his, a clear statement of unity. His hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. The oldest of the nobles, a man named Lord Corvain with gray hair and bitter eyes, spoke first. "Your Majesty, we appreciate you taking time to hear our concerns." "Speak plainly, Corvain," Magnus said, his voice cold and regal, the king fully present now. "You've called this meeting. State your business." Corvain's gaze flicked to Callista with barely concealed disdain. "Very well. It has come to our attention that you have developed an attachment to this Omega and her offspring. While we understand charitable impulses, Your Majesty, you must think of your duty to the kingdom. You need heirs from a strong bloodline, alliances through strategic marriage. This woman offers you nothing." The other nobles murmured their agreement, and Callista felt her face burn with shame. She wanted to pull her hand from Magnus's and flee, but he held on tighter, refusing to let her go. When Magnus spoke, his voice was like winter itself, cold and deadly. "This woman offers me everything, and you will address her with respect, or you will leave this chamber." Lord Corvain bristled. "Your Majesty, please, be reasonable. She's an Omega. She has no standing, no family connections, no political value. And those children aren't even yours. You cannot seriously be considering—" Magnus stood so abruptly his chair scraped across the stone floor, with a shriek. His eyes blazed gold, and the temperature in the room dropped precipitously. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority, and Callista could feel his power rolling off him in waves. "Let me make something perfectly clear. Callista Moonglow is under my protection, which means she is untouchable. Those children are mine in every way that matters, which means they are royalty and will be treated as such. And if anyone in this room or this kingdom has a problem with that, they are welcome to challenge me for the crown. Otherwise, you will accept my decisions and support them, or you will find yourself without a place in my court." The silence that followed was deafening. No one dared meet Magnus's eyes. No one dared speak. Then Magnus reached down and gently pulled Callista to her feet, keeping her close to his side. When he spoke again, his voice had lost none of its steel. "I am going to marry this woman. We will have a proper ceremony in 3 months' time, and all of you will attend and show the appropriate respect. I will formally adopt Arlo and Lyra as my children and heirs. And if any of you have a problem with any of this, the door is behind you. Leave now, and don't come back." No one moved. No one left. Magnus nodded once, satisfied. "Good. This meeting is over. You're all dismissed." He led Callista from the chamber, his arm around her waist, and she could feel him trembling with suppressed rage. It wasn't until they were back in the privacy of her chambers that he finally let out a long, shuddering breath. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," he said, his voice rough. "I should have handled them sooner, not let it get to this point." Callista turned to face him, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "You were magnificent. You didn't let them diminish us. You claimed us in front of everyone, made it clear we were yours." Magnus's hands came to rest on her waist, pulling her closer. "You are mine. You and Arlo and Lyra. You're my family, Callista. My heart. And I will burn down anyone who tries to take that from me." The ferocity in his eyes, the possessive protectiveness, should have frightened her. But instead, it made her feel cherished, safe, loved. "Then marry me," she whispered. "Not in 3 months. Now. Today. I don't want to wait anymore. I want to be yours officially for the whole world to see." Magnus's eyes widened, and then he was kissing her. Deep and desperate, and full of everything he felt but couldn't say. When he pulled back, he was smiling. That rare, beautiful smile that transformed his entire face. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." They were married that very evening. In a small ceremony in the castle's chapel, with only Meredith and a few trusted staff as witnesses, Callista wore a simple white gown that Meredith had rushed to alter, and Magnus wore his formal black, his hair pulled back to show his face. Arlo and Lyra were there too, held by Meredith during the ceremony, their silver eyes watching as their mother and the Lycan King spoke vows that bound them together. When Magnus kissed her as his wife, Callista felt like she was floating. This was real. This was her life now. She had a husband who loved her, children who were safe and thriving, and a future that stretched out before her full of possibility. That night, after Arlo and Lyra were asleep in their nursery, Magnus carried Callista to his chambers. The room was warm and intimate, lit by candlelight and the glow of the fireplace. He set her down gently on his massive bed and looked at her with such tenderness that she felt her eyes well up with tears. "I love you," he said simply, kneeling beside the bed so he could look into her eyes. "I love you with everything I am, Callista Dravenhart." Hearing her new name on his lips made her smile through her tears. "I love you too, Magnus. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for giving me a life worth living." He kissed her then, slow and reverent, and everything else fell away. There was only them, only this moment, only the two of them choosing each other despite everything the world had tried to do to keep them apart. The years that followed were filled with joy and growth. Callista blossomed from the broken, frightened woman she'd been into a confident queen, beloved by the people for her kindness and wisdom. She worked alongside Magnus to improve conditions for Omegas throughout the kingdom, establishing sanctuaries and support systems so no one would ever have to go through what she had. Arlo and Lyra grew into strong, spirited children, equally comfortable in the training yards, learning to fight as they were in the library, learning to read. Magnus trained them himself, teaching them not just combat, but strategy, honor, compassion. He was a fierce but loving father, and the twins adored him, never knowing that he hadn't been there from the very beginning because to them, he always had been. The kingdom prospered under their rule. Magnus was still feared by his enemies, still the fierce warrior king who had conquered the northern territories. But now there was balance. Where before he had been all hard edges and cold calculation, Callista brought warmth and humanity. Together, they were formidable. But it wasn't all perfect. There were challenges, conflicts, moments when the past threatened to rise up and drag them back down. There were nights when Callista woke up from nightmares of being back on that auction block, of losing her children. And there were days when Magnus's duties as king kept him away for longer than either of them liked, when the weight of the crown felt too heavy. But they always came back to each other, always chose each other, always remembered that they were stronger together than they could ever be apart. One evening, 5 years after that fateful night in the auction hall, Callista stood on the balcony of their chambers, watching the sun set over the mountains. She heard Magnus enter behind her, felt his arms wrap around her waist as he pulled her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about, Moonlight?" he murmured against her hair. Callista smiled, covering his hands with hers. "I was thinking about how far we've come, how that scared woman on the auction block never could have imagined this life, how that lonely king who walked into that hall never could have imagined finding a family." Magnus pressed a kiss to her temple. "Sometimes I still can't believe you're real, that this is real, that I get to have this." She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to cup his face. He'd changed over the years, too. There were a few strands of silver in his black hair now, laugh lines around his eyes from all the time spent smiling with their children. He was still fierce, still formidable, but he'd found peace, found joy. "We get to have this," she corrected gently. "Not just you. Both of us. We chose this life together." From inside the chambers, they could hear Arlo and Lyra arguing about something, their young voices raised in mock indignation, before dissolving into laughter. Magnus chuckled, the sound rumbling deep in his chest. "I should probably go referee before they destroy something." "Probably," Callista agreed, but neither of them moved. They stood there wrapped in each other's arms, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the world in shades of gold, and for a moment, everything was perfect. "Thank you," Magnus said quietly. seriously. Thank you for trusting me with your heart, for letting me be part of your family, for choosing me every day, even when it would be easier not to. Callista felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible, for making me feel worthy when everyone else made me feel like nothing, for loving my children like they were yours, from the very beginning. They are mine, Magnus said fiercely. Just like you are mine. Just like I am yours. Completely and irrevocably. She kissed him then, pouring everything she felt into it. Love and gratitude and hope and promise. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. Come on, Callista said, taking his hand. Let's go see what chaos our children have created. They walked back inside together, hand in hand, leaving the sunset behind and stepping into the warm glow of their home. Arlo and Lyra's laughter echoed through the chambers, and Magnus swept them both up in his arms, spinning them until they shrieked with delight. Callista watched her family, her heart so full it felt like it might burst, and thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that terrible auction hall to this moment of pure, simple joy. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been simple, but it had been worth it. Every scar, every tear, every moment of fear and doubt had led her to this. To Magnus, who was everything she never knew she needed. To Arlo and Lyra, who were her reason for living. To this life, full of love and laughter and second chances. She thought about the woman she'd been, standing on that platform with her babies in her arms, convinced that her story was ending. But it hadn't been an ending at all. It had been a beginning. And as Magnus caught her eye over their children's heads and smiled at her with all the love in the world, Callista smiled back and thought, this is what happily ever after looks like. Not perfect, but real. Not easy, but worth fighting for. Not the end of the story, but the beginning of the best chapter yet. Outside, the moon rose over the mountains, full and bright, casting silver light over the kingdom. And inside the castle, in chambers filled with warmth and love, a family that had been broken and lost and sold, found each other and built something new. Something beautiful. Something that would last forever. Because some bonds are stronger than blood. Some love is stronger than fate. And sometimes, the fiercest warriors are the ones who fight not with swords and strength, but with tenderness and devotion and the courage to believe that broken things can be made whole again. Magnus had growled those words on that first night, fierce and protective and absolute. I'll be husband and father both. And he had kept that promise. Every single day, through the struggles and the joys, the challenges and the triumphs. He had been exactly what he said he would be, and more. And Callista, the Omega who had been sold with twin pups in her arms, had become a queen, a wife, a mother, a woman who knew her worth and stood tall in it. Together, they had taken broken pieces and built a kingdom of love, and that, more than any crown or title or power, was the greatest victory of all. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this beautiful love story. Let us know what you thought of this tale full of emotions and surprises. Tell us your name, where you're watching from, and rate this story from 0 to 10 if it touched your heart. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.